Hey, what's up? This is Jake from Chestnut Kama, and welcome back to the channel. In chess, it's common knowledge that if you control the center, you will likely have the positional advantage over your opponent, especially when you create a weakness on your opponent and capitalize on it until your opponent crumbles. This is what happened in the game in the winners bracket finals of the American Cup 2026 between Fabiano Caruana versus Wesley So in their second Blitz game. Here we have Fabi playing white while Wesley So is playing black on the opposite side of the board. We have here c4 by Fabi, and Wesley replied with e5. It's the English opening for Fabiano, by the way. We have d3, stopping this pawn from going further to e4. Knight f6 for Wesley. Knight f3. Knight c6. a3 here for Fabi. Fabi does not like this dark square bishop to be on b4 and checks as king. He doesn't want that, so he played a3. Here we have g6 for Wesley. Knight c3. Wesley fianchettos his bishop g7, and here Fabiano Caruana is doing the same thing, g3, and plans to go bishop g2. And here we have Wesley goes d5 and breaks the center. Here c takes d5, knight takes d5, and Fabi goes bishop d2, develops his dark square bishop on d2. Wesley castles. Fabiano continued to fianchettos his light square bishop g2. And here a5 for Wesley. Wesley is claiming more space here in the left side of the board, while Fabiano Caruana castled kingside. Here, the game continued with knight de7. Rook c1 by white. So this rook on a1 is placed on c1, the more active file and the more useful file, I believe, for the rooks on this side for white. Here we have h6 by Wesley. Just don't want any kind of piece to jump over into the square, so h6 for Wesley. Bishop e3 for Fabi, and here we have rook e8 by Wesley. Bishop c5 attacks the knight. And here Wesley also develops his a8 rook into d8. Knight d2 by Fabi. d6 by Wesley attacks the bishop. And here Fabiano Caruana exchanges his dark square bishop to black's knight on e7. Knight takes e7, so Fabiano is satisfied exchanging his dark square bishop, which he probably thought wasn't that useful in the diagonal as it had limited squares to play to. So he takes on the knight on e7. Wesley recaptures with a knight. So the game continued with knight b5 here by Caruana. Scupper attack by the rook on c1. Attack the c7 pawn. At the same time, this knight is also attacking the c7 pawn. Double attacked. And Wesley just pushed the c pawn to c5. Knight c4 by Fabi. Knight f5 by Wesley. Knight a7 attacks the last square bishop over black. Black goes to d7. Knight c6 forks the rook and the queen. Bishop takes the knight, and here we have bishop takes bishop. Rook e6 attacks the bishop. Bishop goes back to g2. And here a4 by Wesley. He claimed more space in this side of the board. The queen cannot take this pawn. If you take the pawn here as white, then there will be b5 forking the knight and the queen, and white loses his knight here, and it will not be good for white. So instead of taking that, Fabi played bishop h3, just pins the knight to the rook. Rook goes back to e8, and here we have Fabi also exchanges knight square bishop for a knight. Bishop takes the knight on f5, g takes f5, and here Fabiano Caruana played e4. He goes to the center, challenging white's control in the center, and here black simply did not take on e4. He goes f4. Now this pawn, white pawn on d3 is a little bit awkward. This is a weakness now for white here, as this will be the center of attack for white. I mean for black here. This d3 weak pawn. And here the game continued with the queen goes to e2 for Fabi. And now Wesley started to pile up an attack for this weakness. Queen d7. Rook c3. Fabiano acknowledges it and defends this pawn by this rook. And here we have rook e6. Ready to go d6. And knight d2 for Fabi. And here rook d8. Knight f3 now. And Wesley saw something that this knight could go to h4 and then eventually h5, which will be a very good outpost for this white knight. Yeah, it will be very hard for black to play here if this white goes into f5. So Wesley played bishop f6, preventing the knight from jumping to h4. If knight h4 will come, then he can just capture with his dark square bishop and problem solved. There will be no knight on f5. Alright, so king g2 by Fabi, king h7 by Wesley, and here, since the knight cannot jump into h4, he goes knight g1, and here rook d6. 3 pieces now are attacking his weak pawn on d3, and Fabi defends it with his other rook, rook b1. Black king goes to e6. I mean, black queen goes to e6. Queen h5. So Fabi was looking for an opportunity to attack here, to attack black here, but Wesley just goes bishop g7. Knight goes back to f3 by Fabi, and here Wesley goes queen g6, offers a queen's exchange, in which Fabi declined to. He goes queen h3. Instead, did not take the queen. He goes to h3. Bishop goes back to f6, still defending the squares here for this knight. Knight goes to e1, defends the pawn instead, and plans to move this rook, one of the rooks. h5 by Wesley, and here we have rook c4, and now rook d4 by Wesley. His rook goes to the center, challenging this rook. You want to take or not? And here rook takes the d4, and rook takes rook, and rook c1. This pawn is still defended by this knight, so this is still okay for white. Here queen goes to g4, offers another queen's exchange by Wesley, and now this queen is kind of trapped here on h3. This queen cannot go outside since there's no way for this queen to go out. There is no way out for this queen here but to just capture the queen on g4, in which Fabi did not do. He just played rook c4 here, challenges the rook in the center. Wesley saw some opportunity to attack white by playing f3, checks the king, and king cannot go back to g1 as the queen is hanging. If it goes to g1, then black can just take the queen, and it's all GG for white. So he has to take with the knight, and this pawn is left undefended. So the rook takes the pawn on d3, and the knight is being attacked by the rook and the queen. So the knight is hanging. Knight goes back to e1, attacks the rook, and simply this rook on d3 goes back to d4 and faces this rook. Alright, rook, let's exchange now, since I just captured your d3 pawn. Here rook takes rook and e takes rook, and knight f3 by Fabiano Caruana, and d3 was this simply just pushed his passed pawn in the center. And here e5 by Fabi attacks the bishop, in which Wesley saw reply with queen takes queen on h3, king takes h3, and here bishop just takes a pawn on e5. And here in this position, Fabiano Caruana just resigned here. He cannot take his bishop on e5. If he takes this with a knight, then the pawn just goes to d2 and promote to queen in the next move. This knight cannot really stop this pawn from promoting. And if white plays a different move here, if he does not take the dark square bishop, then the bishop can just harvest the pawns here. Let's just say king goes to h4. Black takes a pawn here. King takes the h5 pawn, and just here bishop takes e3, and these pawns are going forward. This knight will not be able to stop these 4 pawns from going forward with the help of this dark square bishop. So there's really nothing white can do but to just resign in this position. So yeah, nice game by Wesley. He created some weakness in the center. The game was fairly even until Fabi lost control in the middle game, as his queen was trapped and could not help defend his center. Alright, so I hope we all learned a few things from this game. Center control is important, especially in the early stage of the game. If you see a weakness in your opponent, even if it's just a pawn, go for it. A pawn is still a pawn. Sometimes winning a pawn can win you the game. That's it. Thank you for watching till the end, and have fun playing chess.